Hello, we're Group 2, and we're discussing some of the similarities and differences between India and China, as well as their economic reform and development. India and China are known as Asian economic giants. Geographically, they share a border along the Himalayas. Both countries exhibit demographic dominance. Each of these countries date back to ancient civilization and have an extremely rich history. India and China have two of the fastest growing major economies. They are also the two most populous countries in the world. China is home to over 1.3 billion people, while India is close behind with a population of 1.2 billion. Together, they make up 36% of the world's population. India and China are two of the world's biggest economies. They're also the biggest consumers of rice in the world. Together, they consume 52% of the world's rice. Each country has seen dramatic economic growth in recent decades. However, each country greatly struggles with poverty. In rural areas of China, about 11% live below the poverty line, and 37% of India's population is considered poor. Pollution is also a major problem for both countries. Over the past few years, China has worked to improve their poor air quality, yet air quality in India has continued to worsen. India and China consistently analyze their economic strengths, reinforce political and financial systems, and attempt to establish themselves as a superpower in the global economy. Yet China usually emerges on top in the race for economic dominance. India and China have had a relationship for over 2,000 years. Cultural and economic relations date back to ancient times. The modern relationship began in 1950 when India was one of the first countries to end formal ties with the Republic of China, also known as Taiwan, and recognize the People's Republic of China as the government of mainland China. The modern relationship had been characterized by border disputes which resulted in military conflicts during the 1960s up until the 1980s. By the late 80s, both countries were able to mend diplomatic and economic ties and had attempted to resolve any military issues. In 2008, China emerged as India's largest trading partner. However, India faces a massive trade imbalance heavily in the favor of China, and the two countries have continued to have issues over border disputes.
Chinese history is unique because it is one of the oldest and most populous civilized countries with histories of dynastic families. It's also referred to as an agrarian society or commonly referred to as an agricultural society. Some of Chinese early innovations include the Great Wall of China, the introduction of paper money, silk production, and gunpowder. As an agrarian society, there are 6 common stages of development. The first stage is the rudimentary stage, which ranged from about 4,000 to 10,000 years ago in the Neolithic Age. During this time, Chinese agriculture was developed on the basis of plucking and picking, as well as hunting and fishing. The emergence of agriculture laid a solid foundation for the development of human civilization. The second is the primary stage, covering the Xia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties, ranging from about 2100 BC to 771 BC, during which China invented metal smelting technology, which is the process in which metal is separated from ore by melting. Bronze farm tools began to be used, irrigation projects began to be built, and in general, agricultural technology had some burgeoning development. The third stage spans the time during the spring and autumn and the warring state periods, which range from 770 to 221 BC, when intensive and meticulous farming appeared. Highlighted by the invention of smelting iron, Chinese society, politics, technology, and culture experienced substantial improvements during this era. The mass use of iron farming tools and animal power also propelled the development of agriculture. The fourth stage is the period from the Qin and Han dynasties to the Northern and Southern dynasties, which ranged from 221 BC to 589 AD, when intensive and meticulous farming technology became mature in the dry land and in North China. A set of agricultural technologies including furrowing, harrowing, and leveling land was established, while a multiple of large-scale and sophisticated farming tools were also invented. An agricultural encyclopedia titled Qi Min Yao Shu, Imports Arts for People's Welfare, by famous agronomist Xia Sishi, summarizing previous agriculture experiences, also appeared in this period. The fifth stage spans from dynasties from the Su, Tang, and Song to the Yuan, which ranged from 581 to 1368 AD, when paddy field intensive cultivation appeared. During this period, China's economic center shifted from the north to the south, and various paddy field farming tools were invented and distributed. Cotton was gradually widespread. A lot of agricultural books appeared, while ways of using land also increased. Agricultural experienced substantive improvements both in North and South China. The sixth stage is the advanced phase of the intensive cultivation from the Ming Dynasty to the mid-Qing Dynasty, 1368 to 1840 AD. At this time, the gap between the growing population and relatively scarcer land became increasingly prominent. As a result, the intensive and meticulous farming was even more sophisticated. The new crops from America were also introduced to China, greatly affecting China's crop structure. The diversified kinds of crops and multiple harvest mode became popular across most of the country. There are four prominent early innovations in Chinese history. The first being the Great Wall of China. The Great Wall was not just a wall, it was an integrated military defensive system with watchtowers for surveillance, fortresses for command posts and logistics, beacon towers for communications, etc. In the Ming Dynasty, which ranged from 1368 to 1644, the Great Wall was reconstructed to be stronger and more sophisticated due to better construction techniques being developed. The Great Wall was built with wisdom, dedication, blood, sweat, and tears. Families were separated, and many workers died and were interred as part of the Great Wall itself. There are rumors that over 1 million people had perished during the building of the Great Wall. The second most prominent innovation in Chinese history was the introduction of paper money, which was invented in 740 BC. In 105 AD, Kai Lan, an eunuch during the Eastern Han Dynasty, invented paper from worn fishnet, bark, and cloth. These raw materials could be easily found at a much lower cost, so large quantities of paper could be produced. The making technique was exported to Korea in 384 AD. A Korean monk then took this skill with him to Japan in 610 AD. During a war between the Tang Dynasty and the Arab Empire, the Arabs captured some Tang soldiers and paper-making workers. Thus, a paper factory was set up by the Arabs. In the 11th century, the skill was carried to India when Chinese monks journeyed there in search of a Buddhist sutras. The third innovation in Chinese history is the silk production, which began in about 3000 BC. When silk was first discovered, it was reserved exclusively for the use of the ruler. It was permitted only to the emperor, his close relations, and the very highest of his dignitaries. Within the palace, the emperor is believed to have worn a robe of white silk. Outside, he, his principal wife, and their heir to the throne wore yellow, the color of the earth. Gradually, the various classes of society began wearing tunics of silk, and silk came into more general use. As well as being used for clothing and decoration, silk was quite quickly put to industrial use by the Chinese. This was something which happened in the West only in modern times. Silk, indeed, rapidly became one of the principal elements of the Chinese economy. Silk was used for musical instruments, fishing lines, bowstrings, bonds of all kinds, and even rag paper, the world's first luxury paper. Eventually, even the common people were able to wear garments of silk. During the Han Dynasty, silk ceased to be a mere industrial material and became an absolute value in itself. Farmers paid their taxes in grain and silk. Silk began to be the use of paying Civil War servants and rewarding subjects for outstanding services. Values were calculated in lengths of silk as they had been calculated in pounds of gold. Before long, it was to become a currency used in trade with foreign countries. The use of silk continued during the Tang as well. It is possible that this added importance and was the result of a major increase in production. The last major innovation in early Chinese history was the introduction of gunpowder in the mid-13th century. In Chinese, gunpowder is called "you yao", meaning flaming medicine. Unlike paper and printing, the birth of gunpowder was quite accidental. It was first invented inadvertently by alchemists while attempting to make an elixir of immortality. It was a mixture of sulfur, saltpeter, and charcoal. At the end of the Tang dynasty, gunpowder was being used in military affairs. During the Song and Yuan dynasties, the frequent wars spurred the development of cannons and fire arrows shot from bamboo tubes. In the 12th and 13th centuries, gunpowder spread to Arab countries, then Greece, other European countries, and finally all over the world.
India History. This is a quote by Mark Twain. India is the cradle of human race, the birthplace of human speech, the mother of history, the grandmother of legend, and the great-grandmother of tradition. Our most valuable and the most instructive materials in the history of man are treasured up in India only. The rich heritage of Indian culture can be traced back to ancient times. It is among the world's oldest, which began about 4,500 years ago. The foundation base of ancient Indian culture remained the same. From everyday dressing to elaborate rituals, every minute and major detail was decided centuries back. The root of Indian culture has existed since the ancient times, and this is what it makes it strong. There are three main religions in ancient India: Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. They were ruled by great dynasties such as the Maurya, Gupta, Maratha, and Chola dynasties. India was under colonial rule of Britain for over 200 years, and Indian mathematicians made early contributions to the study of concept of zero as a number, algebraic abbreviations, and the calculations of pi. They also invented cubicle steels, ink, hence the black ink or India ink. They also invented surgery as far back as 600 BC, and buttons as ornamental buttons dating back to 2000 BC. Economies of China and India. China has a centrally planned economies and are usually categorized as a particular variant of socialism. India has a market-based economy just like the one we have here in the US. Both India and China became a democracy. China's economic reform was led by Deng Xiaoping, and it began in agriculture. India's economic reform, also known as economic liberalization in India, with the goal of making the economy more market-oriented and expanding the role of private and foreign investment. China dominated the world basically in mass producing electronics and industrial plants. India dominated in software design and services. Since they speak better English because of the British, they have the advantage in programming and software development. The economy of India. The economy of India is the seventh largest in the world by nominal GDP and the third largest by purchasing power parity. The country is classified as a newly industrialized country, developing into an open market economy, and a developing country with an average GDP growth rate of approximately 7.2%. India's economy is very diverse, and it includes traditional village farming, modern agriculture, modern industries such as chemicals, engineering, gems and jewelries, textile and mining, services in energy and power, infrastructure, retail, tourism, and banking and finance. Service sector is responsible for growth in the economy. India's services sector has the largest in the GDP, accounting for about 57%. Call centers in India has the largest labor productivity. The economy of China is the world's fastest major economy. It is second in the world after the United States. Recently, the GDP growth slowed down to 6.9%. China's economy has grown by increasing investment in the manufacturing industry and the increasing foreign trade. It is the largest exporter and the second largest importer in the world. The country has been the world's largest exporter since 2009. China not only is the world's largest exporter, it is the world's largest trading nation as measured by the sum of exports and imports, having replaced the United States for the first time since 2014. China is the largest manufacturing economy in the world with a 23.2% share of manufacturing activity. The US is in the second place with a 17.2% share. China is also known for its low-priced consumer goods.
Up until the late 1970s, the Indian economy was larger in size and accounted for a slightly bigger share of GDP. In 1979, just after the agricultural reform in China that unleashed the productive forces, China overtook India in terms of global income share. Around 2000, the economic gap between India and China began to grow by leaps and bounds. By 2013, Chinese per capita GDP was more than 3.3 times that of the Indian economy when measured in terms of the US dollar. While India may overtake GDP growth rate, China will account for a greater share of global GDP. As we mentioned earlier, India and China are two of the world's biggest economies. However, they are far from equal in size. As you can see by this chart, China's share of GDP in the world has grown by leaps and bounds at a very rapid rate. While India has experienced growth, it has been at a much more modest pace than China. This graph outlines the composition of GDP based on sector in India and China. The manufacturing sector accounts for about 47% of the economy in China. China is considered one of the world's leading manufacturers. Industries account for about 28% of the Indian economy. India's service sector is higher than China's, with the sector accounting for over half of the economy. India tends to excel in the service industry. Agriculture is still one of the major sectors in India. Despite the growth of services and other industries in recent years, a majority of India's population is still involved in agriculture. This sector provides millions of jobs for Indian people, especially in rural areas. China has reduced its dependence on agriculture as a major industry due to the explosive growth in the manufacturing sector. As a result, many Chinese people have been able to be pulled out of poverty. Recently, China's government has decided to attempt to transition the country away from industry and manufacturing in order to drive it towards services.
India is expected to overtake China in total population around year 2028. And while their economy is not as large, India has already overtaken China in their rate of economic growth. It is difficult to tell if the democracy of India is an economic advantage or disadvantage compared to China's communist leadership. What is clear is that India has taken some cues from China and is attempting some of the same methods that helped China grow. Looking forward, the overall outlook for both China and India is positive. China has begun looking inward, advocating a consumer-based society rather than a manufacturer-based one. With a population of over 1.3 billion, there are plenty of potential customers. While there are some negative signs in India, such as poverty and pollution, they do have a sort of framework to work from. After all, China was dealing with those same problems not that long ago. If India can overcome the ample bureaucracy and streamline some of the decision making, while at the same time making environmentally responsible improvements to their infrastructure, we could be talking about India as one of the world's elite countries in 10 or 20 years.